and they are getting the feedback from the customer based on the developed prototype. Based on that, they are going to revise and enhance the prototype. By making use of this extreme prototyping, we can have a complete or a functional user interface will going to be developed with a very little regard to the actual services. Revise and enhance the prototype. In this, it will be of two types. One, it can be related to horizontal prototype and another one is related to vertical prototype. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to one and all. Welcome back to the session 5 of Unit 2 and we are in the B.C.A 6th semester subject called Software Engineering. I am Rohini TS, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So as we all discussed in the previous session, we have learned regarding the problem analysis. So we got to know that why analysis of the problem is required, and also I have discussed regarding what are the stages we have with respect to the problem solving. When we analyze the problem, then that needs to be solved. Then what are the stages we have? That is what I have discussed in my previous session. Along with that, we got to know what is the software metrics as well as measures. So in that, we have learned regarding the classification of software metrics, and also I have discussed regarding the types, that is nothing but classification, and also we got to know regarding what is monitoring and control of a product or a project or even a software, and also we have learned regarding the processes whatever we have in the software controlling as well as monitoring. That is what I have discussed in my previous session. So in our today's session, we're going to learn about what is software prototyping is all about. Then what is its advantage, on what scenario we have to use it, what are the disadvantages we are going to face when we have the software prototyping, and what are the types of software prototyping we have. That is what I will be discussing in my today's session. Let me get into the topic with respect to software prototyping. So now, already we know about a problem, right? First, you have to understand the feasibility study, whether it is possible to implement or not. If it is yes, then requirement needs to be collected. So once it gathered, then that needs to be analyzed. So once the analysis is done, then that needs to be converted into design. So from the technical aspects, that needs to be designed with the help of certain designing flowcharts or certain models of designing tools and techniques. We have to design the requirements of a customer. So once it got designed, that needs to be developed with the help of some programming language, right? So when we are developing that particular problem or a project or a product, we can design that by making use of this software prototype model. So it's like a dummy model. So they are not incorporating the actual functionality in the dummy model. They are simply giving you the core functionality of any of the system that user wanted to have. So that in the prototype model, it will going to refers or it will going to have what building of software application prototypes which displays the functionality of the product which is under development. So you can see the product even before the development of a software or a product. It's like a dummy model. You won't get the actual working in the dummy model. It's like a prototype only. So before the development of any of a product or a project, you can see that, and also that may not actually hold the exact logic of the original software. They won't reveal the confidentiality of a software, but they will just show you how it will going to be work when it got developed. So if you consider the example of blueprint of any of the building, or if you can consider the virtual view of any of the building, so you can walk through that, right? Like if it will going to have 360-degree view of all the building and all the construction, whatever you wanted to have, so that if you wanted to have any changes, you can suggest them, and if you wanted to remove some content from that, you can do that. So without spending much time and without wasting any of the money, you can do that. Same thing will going to happen with this prototyping model. It will be a dummy model. It will just going to have a functionality. It will going to have a core functionality of a system, but they won't showcase you the actual working process. They just give you how it will going to work once it got built. So that is what in the software prototyping, and mainly it will going to help us in order to understand the customer requirements at early stage of the development. So why? Because when they are developing any of the dummy model or when they are having a demo of a particular project or a product, will be given to the customer for the review. So once it is given to the customer, they are just going to review it and they will give the feedback, so that user will get to know what are the functionality we are going to have once it got built. That is why in the software prototyping model, it will mainly going to help the customer to get to know how this software is working even before the development or when it is under the development of that project. So just by taking the review of the customer, the developer or a designer will be able to enhance the performance of the product or a project. That is why this software model will going to be very helpful. And also mainly this prototype is a working model of a software with some limited functionality. As I told earlier, they are not going to have all the functionality, or they are not going to incorporate all the functionality of a product or a project. So that this prototype model is like a working model for the software with limited functionality. It will not going to showcase any of the core functionality or how it actually works. So instead of that, it will just showcase how it will going to be worked once it got built, so that in the prototype does not hold the exact logic which we are going to use in the actual software application, so that it will not going to have a actual logic. It will just showcase you that what is the things which we are incorporating in the project or a product. And also mainly this will going to allow the user to evaluate the developer proposals and try them before implementation. So as per the requirement of a customer, developer will going to develop, or designer will going to design. So once it reach to the customer back, they are going to take the review or a feedback from the customer, so that user will going to evaluate the proposals which is given by the developer or a designer. If they are okay with the requirements which is given by the developer or a designer, then they will say okay. So whatever the requirement is said to be okay, then that will going to be incorporated in the actual system. That is what we are going to do in the software prototyping. And then what are the approach we have to design this software prototyping? So we have several steps or methods in order to design any of a prototype or any of the software prototyping model. So in that, what we have, so first is regarding basic requirement identification. So in this mainly it will going to concentrate with respect to the user interface. How must be the user interface? How user can interact with a system or a product or a project? That is what will going to be identifying the first stage of a approach to design this software prototyping. So once they got to know how user wanted to see their project or a product, based on that they are going to do the prototyping. After that, developing the initial prototype. So in this they will bother about the security, confidentiality. So and also they will think about what are the core functionality we need to incorporate, what can be seen to the user, which should be hide from the user. All those things are developing of initial prototype with certain or limited number of functionality will going to be incorporated in the prototype model. So for example, completely if it is having 10 number of requirements of a customer, only 2 to 3 will going to be incorporated in the dummy model or with the initial prototyping. So once they started working or when they started initializing the development of that prototyping model, will be given to the customer for their review of the prototype, like what are the changes needs to be incorporated and how much time it needs to take, what must be the effort and what is the budget. Everything will going to be discussed, and that negotiation will going to take place between the customer or stakeholders with the designer and developer. So when they got the review of that prototype or when they are getting the feedback from the customer based on the developed prototype, based on that they are going to revise and enhance the prototype. So if the customer says one more requirement, or I wanted to remove this requirement, I want this user interface to be like this, like that. So whatever they are saying as their requirement will going to be taken as a feedback or a review. So by collecting all the reviews from the stakeholders, that will going to be revised in the coming prototype. That means they are just going to evaluate or they are going to evaluate the prototype what they are developing. So this is how, or this is what are the first steps we have in order to design the software prototyping. This is the 4 steps which we will going to takes place. So as I discussed earlier, at the last stage, that is revise and enhance the prototype. In this, it will be of two types. One, it can be related to horizontal prototype and another one is related to vertical prototype. So in the horizontal prototype, they are just going to mainly focuses on the user interface for the product, how it needs to be look like what must be the type of interface we must have. So that will going to be focuses and broader view of the entire system without concentrating on the internal function. So in the horizontal prototype, what they are going to do, they are just going to have a look regarding the user interface and they won't bother how it will going to work in terms of functionality. That is in the horizontal prototype. Then what they are going to do in the vertical prototype in the terms of revise and enhancement of a performance of the prototype. So they are going to have a detailed elaboration of a specific function or a subsystem in the product. So here functionality will going to be focused in the vertical prototype, right? So in the vertical prototype, functionality will going to be described or it will going to be identified. In the horizontal prototyping, they are just going to bother about the user interface. So here they are going to have a look regarding the functionality of a system, or if we have any other subsystem within that, that will going to be focus. This is how all the stages of approach which is helpful for the design of a software prototype will going to takes place. So next we'll see the types of prototyping. So here we have a list or types of software prototyping. Under that we have throwaway or rapid prototyping. Next we have a evolutionary prototyping and we have a incremental prototyping. At last we have a extreme prototyping. We'll see each type of prototyping one by one. First what we have, that is related to throwaway or rapid prototyping. As the name indicates, throwaway, what we are throwing here, that is what dummy model or prototype. So customer will come up with a certain requirement and it will going to reach to the analyst, designer as well as to the developer. Once the analyst got analyzed all the requirements which is given by the customer, then it will be given to the designing team. So that designer will going to design. Once it got designed, it needs to be go to the development team. So in the throwaway or rapid prototyping, so they will just collect one or more requirements from the customer and they will start working towards to that. And if the customer is satisfied with a dummy model or a prototype model, then they will just throw away that prototype model. They start working with the actual model. So we have a prototype as well as the actual model. So just like a demo. So in the prototype model, they are just going to incorporate certain or functionality or core functionality. If it is okay by the customer, then they will start working with a actual prototype. So that is what we are going to do in the throwaway prototype. They are just going to throw the prototype away once the requirement got satisfied by the customer. They will start working with the development of the actual product or a project. And we are also going to call this as a rapid or close-ended prototyping. So in this, mainly we are going to use very less effort is required. Why? Because they are going to incorporate only certain functionality or what little number of requirements will going to be implemented with a particular or minimum requirement analysis in order to build a prototype. Here it won't require much effort or a time, and even they won't bother about the large number of requirements. Instead of that, they are going to focus on the minimum requirement analysis, so that once the actual requirements are understood, so if the analyst, the person, one who is going to understand all the requirements of a customer, then the prototype is discarded. That's why we are going to call this as a throwaway or rapid prototyping. So once we got to know what are the requirements we have, just they will throw or discard all the prototyping model and they will start developing the actual system. So that this is how this throwaway or rapid prototyping model will going to work. So next, here you can see that first they are going to develop the product or a project with respect to the prototype, and which will be used for the testing of prototype by the customer. So whatever they have developed the prototype, that will given to the customer for the purpose of testing. So once it got tested, then it will going to result for the customer feedback. We are going to get the feedback from customer or review from the customer. So if they say some changes with respect to the tested prototype, that will again going to be incorporated with respect to the refinement of prototype. It will just like a cycling method. So if you wanted to refine it, you can do it. If you don't wanted to refine it, you just go with a usage of that prototype. This is how this throwaway or rapid prototype will going to work. So next what we have, evolutionary prototyping. I just wanted to let you understand the difference between the evolutionary and incremental. So if I say evolutionary, in that you just imagine I have 10 requirements. Okay, so initially I am going to implement only 5 requirements and I am left out with another 5. So these left out 5 will going to be incorporated when and there we require. Fine. So when I wanted to have remaining requirements to be satisfied, at the time we are going to incorporate it one by one as per the requirement of a customer. But in the incremental, instead of preparing one by one requirement, or instead of having a prototype one by one, they are just going to have a collection of modules, or they are just going to have a number of modules together or prototypes together, and whenever it is required, it will going to be incorporated or integrated together. Then it will going to find a solution for the complex one. That is the difference between evolutionary prototyping as well as to the incremental prototyping. And also we are going to call this evolutionary prototype as a breadboard prototyping, and also it will based on building the actual function prototypes with minimum functionality in the beginning. As I said earlier, whatever the functionality I require in the initial stage, that will going to be developed. After that, as and when we require, then they are going to be incorporated, or that will going to be added to the existing prototype. That is related to evolutionary prototype. So next we have a incremental prototypes. So in this, what they are going to do, instead of building each prototype model one by one, they are just going to build all the collection of, or together they are going to build a set of prototypes. So together it will going to be integrated, then we can get the solution for the actual one, so that we can make the complete system. So in the incremental prototyping, we are building a multiple functional prototypes of the various subsystems. So here they are not only focusing on a particular requirements to be satisfied. Instead of that, they are having a multiple functional prototypes, and also they are going to build that different or multiple number of prototypes for the various subsystem. So here they are not considering the problem as a single task. Instead of that, they are dividing that into number of subsystem or a sub problem, and they are building the prototype for all the sub models. So whenever it is required, they are going to integrate all these together, and they are just going to have a solution for the problem, and they can make that as a complete system, so that then it will going to be integrated all the available prototypes in order to form a complete system. This is the difference between evolutionary as well as to the incremental. Then what about this extreme prototyping? As the name indicates, extreme, it will be at the next level. We are going to use this with respect to the web development domain. So in this extreme prototyping, it will going to have 3 stages. In the first stage, basic prototype with all the existing page which is present in the HTML format. It will going to have all the web pages as a basic prototype in the first level. Next, in the second level, the data processing is simulated using a prototype service layer. So first they are going to have a web pages, or they are going to have a document in the terms of HTML format. So after that, in the second stage, data processing will going to takes place. At the third stage or a final stage, the services are implemented and integrated to the final prototypes. So they are going to collect the requirement, data processing will going to take place. At last we can get the output. So in that output, it will going to implement and integrate to the final prototype. That means we are getting the solution as a dummy model. We are not having the actual one. Instead of that, we are having the prototype model or a dummy model. If you wanted to incorporate certain requirement, you can do it, and if you don't want it, you can just remove it without any wastage of time, money as well as to the effort. This is regarding extreme prototyping. And also by making use of this extreme prototyping, we can have a complete or a functional user interface will going to be developed with a very little regard to the actual services. This is how all the types of prototyping model will going to work. So now you can see the software prototyping applications. That means where we can use this software prototyping. Mainly it can be used in the development of a system which is having high level of user interaction. That includes the online system as an example. So we require more interaction in the online kinds of system, right? So there I wanted to navigate from one page to another page, upload and download will going to be there, and browsing of some data will be there. So when we have more user interaction in any of the online transaction, there you can have this software prototyping. Why? Because if something goes wrong, nothing will going to change or nothing will going to affect the actual one. That's why it's one of the application with respect to the online standards or online system. And also you can use this software prototyping where the system users you needs to fill out the forms or go through various screens before the data is processed, can use the prototyping in a very effective manner in order to give the exact look and feel even before the actual software is developed. As I told earlier, if I wanted to move from one page to another page, or if you wanted to navigate much in an online system, then this software prototyping methodology will be very useful. And also we can use this software prototyping model which will going to involve too much of data processing, and most of the functionality is internal with very little user interface which does not usually benefit from the prototyping. So these are the applications. So you can have it in the online system and where the user interaction is more and where you wanted to navigate from one page to another page frequently, then you can go with software prototyping. Now we'll see what are the advantages we can have with the help of this prototyping models. Mainly it will going to increase the user involvement. Why? Because user will get to know how the system will going to work even when it is under the development. And also working model of a system is displayed and the user get a better understanding of the system which is being developing, so that user will get to know how will be the actual functionality of a system when it is under the development itself, so that it will going to reduces the time and cost as the defects can be detected much earlier. So when we are started working with certain functionality of a product or a project or a system, at that time detection of the errors will be very easy. So when we got to know the errors in the early stage, then it will going to save the time as well as to the cost, and it will be helpful in order to have a quicker user in feedback, or it will going to give the quick user feedback or a review which will be available for the developer or a designer, which will going to have a better solution for a problem. And also you can incorporate the missing functionality in a early stage itself. And also this prototyping or prototype model will going to remove the ambiguity or confusions or difficulty functionality can be identified in the earlier stage itself. So these are the advantages we can expect from the prototyping model. Then what are the disadvantages we have? So risk of insufficient requirement analysis owing to the too much dependency on the prototype. So here when we don't know much thing regarding the requirements of a software or a product, at the time we need to rely on the software prototyping model. So that can be a overhead to the software prototyping model. So if there is no match between the expectation and reality, at last we will end up with sadness. So that the risk of insufficient requirement is also going to be one of the disadvantage, and users sometimes they may get confused in the prototypes and with the actual system. What is the prototype and what is the actual system? So sometimes when they have more number of requirement, they may get confused. And also somehow this prototyping model will going to increase the complexity of the system. Why? Because we need to develop the prototype, then that needs to be converted into actual. Somehow it's overhead for the designer as well as to the developer. So these are the advantages, disadvantages and application and types of prototyping model, along with the basic terminologies or basic things which is related to the prototyping model. I hope you all understood regarding the prototyping model. It's all about my today's session. session. So in our coming session, we're going to have a look regarding this user interface prototyping, and also we'll see what is this analysis and modeling is all about. Let me meet you in the next session. Until that, keep learning, keep on growing. Thank you.